Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode number 332 of the Comic Watcher Show. He's Chad, I'm Matt, and this is our show about comics. So thank you for joining us. Chad, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm here. I'm ready to talk with Matthew, who I haven't talked to in a while. And
We've got a super awesome guest with us tonight. Creator Matthew Dow Smith is here to talk to us about Amelia Shadows from Mad Clips. Excuse me. That was a heck of a transposition. Mad Cave Paper Cuts.
Yeah.
And all of the all ages goodness that comes with it. So, Matthew, welcome back to our show.
Hi, Chad said, thanks for having me again.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. We still can't quite figure out how long it's been. It's been at least since the pandemic, apparently.
Yeah,
according to Chad.
Well, it was you, Ron Mars, and Paul Harding. We were talking about your Kickstarter for the Beast of the Black Hand, or so.
Yeah, must have been the first or the second one. That's the question. But yeah,
I think it was the second one.
So it's been a while. So
yeah.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So, well, Matthew, how have things been? You're on, I think it's volume 2 of Amelia Shadows now. Is that correct?
Yeah, volume 2 just came out last week, I believe. It's weird. I'm doing 2 graphic novel series at the same time, both for different imprints of Mad Cave. And so time and reality all just sort of blend into one big mess. So publicizing Amelia Shadows and the Monster in the Box, which is book 2 of the series, and book 3 of the October Girl is coming out from their Maverick imprint in October, and I'm literally in the middle of wrapping up October Girl book 4, drawing it. So really, it's one huge blur, but it's a very nice blur. I'm certainly not complaining about it, but it's a lot of work. So I'm literally I'm already beginning the mental countdown of, okay, when do I need to start publicizing October Girl book 3?
Right.
Because that's going to be in the next month or so where I have to start talking about that some more. So.
And then you recently wrap the DC Magic.
Yeah, that was a couple years ago. That was such a funny book because that was my first kids book, and we never had a deadline on it because they just gave me the approval, and I went great and just did it, and turned it in like a year before they needed it. So that the timing on that is like, to me, it's so weird because now that's a book that I drew, 3 years ago, something like that. But it really only came out, I think, a year and a half or so ago. So it's one of the really weird things about going from like monthly periodical comics to doing these graphic novels. Because you do an issue of the X-Files, you do an issue of Starman or whatever, and you finish it usually, right up against the deadline. It gets sent off to the printer, and then 2 or 3 months later, the book's out. And you do these graphic novels, and it's like you don't see them for a year,
right?
And it's
off in the ether somewhere.
We're racing to finish October Girl 4, and we have a much more because I'm doing so much. We have a much more protracted schedule. It doesn't come out until I think, late spring of next year. But it's like I need to finish it now. It's a totally different schedule. So you're sort of like, by the time you're doing podcasts and stuff to talk about the Monster in the Box, like, I have to remind myself what happens in the story. I have done 8 Amelia books. They're finished. They're in the can. And we did this deal with Paper Cuts to do at least the first 4. So I literally drew this book a couple years ago now. And I've done a bunch of other Amelia stories since then. So they kind of, again, it all just blurs together. So it's a little different than when you're like working for DC and DC is like, hey, why aren't you done yet? That needs to like go to the printer like right now. And then you need to start the next issue. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's fun. I'm having a good time. In fact, I'm having a great time doing these.
Speaking of your DC work, you did Batman 66 and shoot one of the.
Oh, Steed and Peel. Yeah. With Ian Eddington.
Yeah.
Was that one with Ian? I did one with Ian. Oh, and
I'm thinking of the one with, it's one of the, I was looking at it this evening and I'm blanking. It's the one with the lady spy.
Yeah. It's Steed and Mrs. Peel.
Yeah. Okay.
The original Avengers.
The original Avengers.
Yeah, which is one of those funny books. It's sort of my the advice I give to a lot of aspiring creators, and who knows how true this stuff is anymore in the constantly changing landscape of the comic book industry. But my thing is like when you find editors who get what you do and like what you do, cling to them for dear life. And that book came about because I think somebody had mentioned the idea of doing that book, and I had said to my editor and my longtime friend, I would love to write that. And they were like, DC, I'm not a big enough creator for DC to let write stuff. But like 6 months later, I get an email from them saying, hey, you want to draw it? And I'm like, oh, absolutely. So, because I'm a huge Avengers fan. In fact, I've got a couple of seasons back in my bookcase on Blu-ray. So that was fun. Yeah, Ian Eddington wrote that one, and it's a great script. Like just perfectly captured both of the shows. And I'm sort of famously against crossovers. I think when I was doing the Doctor Who comic, people were always asking, "Oh, would you do a Doctor Who Star Trek comic?" This was before they actually did that. My answer was like, "Oh, hell no! They don't make sense together. They're different. They're different universes with different rules. You can't put those things together." And they're Marvel doing Marvel meets Star Wars is to me. It's like the rule sets. They don't make sense to me.
I have feelings about that.
But then you get to do something like this, Batman 66, and Steed and Peel work perfectly together. Like they really do. They do mesh together so well, and Ian did just such a fantastic job on the script. So that was a joy to draw.
Well, I think they did a couple of those kind of crossovers with the, the old shows. Am I right?
They did remember. Like a Batman 66 Legion of Superheroes, I believe.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I think they did Man of Uncle that David Hahn drew. That was great. They just had a lot of fun. That was I missed that DC Digital kind of is in its own entity because I got to do so many cool things just for the digital stuff, and there was always a feeling of. You could get away with a little more. You could break the mold a little more, and
a little more creative freedom.
Yeah, it wasn't even necessarily creative freedom because you're still, like Batman and Steed and Peel. It's like you still had to keep two different sets of licensors happy, but it was still like there was just a little more. It was just a little more fun, and I just I think because of DC Digital, 1 year I got to do Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman all within 1 year.
Oh, cool!
Which is insane. Like artists like me, and I think a bunch of us from the '90s who kind of broke in the '90s have talked about this. Is that artists like me who have kind of an odd style? At least my when I was still doing mainstream comics, my style was very odd for mainstream comics. But sort of in the '90s, there was a little more. There was a little more leeway. There was a little more experimentation. There was a little like, well, this is different, but let's give it a shot.
Sure.
and I think you had more opportunities to be, yeah, just to kind of do something different. And you know, there are obviously still, you know, a lot of people working in the industry who have very unique styles, very idiosyncratic styles. But I think it's harder. I think it's harder now to kind of break in doing that. But the '90s was a great time for that. There's like, can you finish a book on time? Here we go. Great.
Well, before I get us further off track, let's go back further and talk about how you got into comics as a reader and what made you want to make them yourself.
Well, weirdly, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. So my very first comic, I was born in 1971. I saw Star Wars in the movie theater multiple times. My father, may he rest in peace, who had no interest in science fiction at all, took me to that movie multiple times and sat through it with me. But back in the day, remember the big Marvel treasury of Star Wars adaptation that Chaykin, and I can't remember who else was involved, but Chaykin was the artist. I don't remember.
I don't 100% know that, but for some reason that's ringing true. And internet, correct me if I'm wrong, but Howard Chaykin.
Chaykin did the art, or it did at least the breakdowns. Anyways, they put out two of them, and my mom brought home from the shopping, from grocery shopping, the second volume of that. And because she knew I liked Star Wars, and she's like, well, this will keep Matt busy for 15 minutes. And, I read it and read it and reread it and reread it. And that was sort of my first comic, but it wasn't really until I discovered, several years later, and, this is probably the 80s at this point, and we're all kids on our BMX bikes. We really did that. Biking down to the drugstore on the corner, and I bought I think it's issue number 284 of Legion of Superheroes, and that was it. I was hooked on the Legion, got really into Firestorm and Blue Devil, which both kind of came out roughly the same time. So I kind of I came up in that weird, like, old man yelling at the cloud period of we had to go down to the corner shop and get our comic. Comic shops existed, but we didn't know they existed, and they were very, very few and far between. But yeah, that, and then I was just so into Legion of Superheroes that I started drawing the character. I would copy the drawings out of the book. So I learned, basically, Keith Giffen taught me how to draw.
Cool.
And I just, worshiped the ground Keith Giffen walked on. But yeah, that was just kind of it. I just really, it was in the 80s. It was that time. Comics weren't really the huge cultural thing that they became. It was still a very niche thing. And I stopped in high school. I'll tell the story, not to prattle on about this, but I kind of stopped in high school when I discovered I discovered the idea of being a rock star, and played bass in all the garage bands and stuff. And then when I was in college, I was dating a girl who had this giant poster on her dorm room wall of this thing called Moon Shadow. And I was just like, what is that? That looks really cool. And she's like, oh, it's this comic book, Moon Shadow. Here's my copy. You want to borrow it? And so to this day, I blame Mark D. Matias for pulling me back into comics, because it was that moment of like, oh, comics can do this. You can do this kind of story, which, those weren't the comics that I was reading. Those comics didn't exist when I was first reading comics.
Right.
And then after that, it was, I went to school to be, I was going to be a sound designer in theater. That was kind of my thing. While also dreaming of becoming a rock star. But once I once I discovered that, and then very quickly, I think literally within about a 6 month period, like I discovered Moonshadow. I think the first issue of Cages came out, the Dave McKean book that he
Mm,
did. Arkham Asylum came out in hardcover. Um, and there's that sort of proto Vertigo stuff.
yeah,
Um,
the
was
word
all,
vertigo.
and that was like I discovered all that within 6 months. So but from that moment on, it was like, oh, I'm gonna do that. And that led me here. That's 35 years ago now. And other than a brief stint at Disney, um, I've basically been doing this as my full-time job in all that time, for better or worse. But that's another story.
Hey man, sometimes you got to take the bad with the good, right? I mean, yeah, I don't care what career you're talking about.
Yeah.
Everything has its ups and downs, but especially creatively, I mean, you're gonna have peaks and valleys. So
Oh yeah, and that's something else I always warn people about is that I think one of the freelancing in and of itself is incredibly difficult, and it's getting harder and harder to do. But freelancing in comics is sort of a special kind of hell because so much of your ego is wrapped up in what you do. And so when you hit those sort of fallow periods, which happen in every career, I mean, I talk to guys who've been doing this a lot longer than me, and we have the same conversation of like, this was a good year. I had lots of work, and everything was going great. And then the next year, you can't get arrested. But
right,
that goes in a cycle, and it's frustrating. Both from a when I have to pay my rent aspect, but also just from a purely emotional ego standpoint. um it you really have to weather some self-doubts to kind of keep doing it, and that's really hard to do.
but yet here you are.
Here I am, and actually,
Here you
in
stand.
terms of yeah, particularly, I've talked a few times now about sort of making the transition from doing adult periodical comics to doing kid stuff, because I'd always been sort of a weird artist. I'd always been what we always have called a wonky artist. I didn't do slick stuff. I didn't do really polished superhero sort of books. So I always felt very out of place in mainstream comics. I mean, I loved making them, but it was never entirely happy. And then my agent had been bugging me forever to do like a kids thing. And I was like, no, no, no. My style is too weird for kids. And we ended up pitching something to a publisher that never happened. But as part of that process, they said, could you just put together some visuals? Like it doesn't have to look great. It just has to kind of give an idea of the visuals. And I kind of ended up developing this style, which is what I've been using for Amelia's Shadows.
Hmm.
And I literally did like 5 pages, I think, in one day. And was just like, hey, that was really, really fun. And then I started doing, I think the next thing I did is like, I sat down and was like, well, if I was going to do like a kids thing, what do I do? And I wanted to do the Doom Patrol as a kids book. So I drew like 10 pages of this Doom Patrol kids thing, just for fun in like a day and a half or something. And it literally was like, it was like suddenly having the training wheels off. I wasn't fighting myself. I wasn't like caught up in, oh, are people going to like this? This is so different from everything else. Why can't I just draw like a normal comic book creator? Why do I have to draw weird? And it was wild. And so I haven't really gone back. I've done a couple like spot illustration one-off sort of things just for fun or for a friend or something. But I don't, I would be hard pressed to go back and like do adult comics right now, because this has been so it's just so much fun. It's just a totally different experience for me. So that related to your question somehow, but I don't remember
Oh,
how.
listen, you got around the bend.
This is what I do. I just, I talk.
So, so Amelia Shadows and October Glow both kind of center around magic. What is it about magic and that seems to be your muse?
It's funny, it really kind of all goes back to Zatanna and Blue Devil. I think it's the Blue Devil Summer Fun special, which was, I think, my first experience with Zatanna. I loved DC's magic characters.
Mhm.
I those were my jam when I was a kid. I mean, I love Legion of Superheroes. Ambush Bug. I was obsessed with Ambush Bug and still am. But like, Crisis on Infinite Earths came out, and I saw Doctor Occult for the first time.
Mhm.
I saw the Phantom Stranger for the first time, and there's just something about them that really, really appealed to me. Particularly Zatanna, just because I thought, the idea of her dad was a magician before her, and she's kind of carrying on this legacy. And so I think when I first started like coming up with my own ideas for comics in college, I gravitated towards that. And also, Gaiman is obviously an incredibly problematic reference point at this point, but I was reading Sandman, and I was responding to that kind of material, and the stuff that Mark does, and that Grant was doing at the time. And so, yeah, there was just something that spoke to me, that really resonated with me, that I found really interesting. And those first sort of attempts at ideas were very much just mimicking that. But like, as I developed, and in a weird way, like the October Girl, that's an idea that I came up with in college. It was the very first idea I ever had for a comic. It was very different than what it became, but
Mhm.
like, all the basic elements are the same. That was me kind of doing a Neil Gaiman riff. But then, because I ended up breaking into comics as an artist, it was really hard to kind of get, particularly in the 90s, it was very hard to get people to like, no, I write too. I want to write too. I write too. And
Right, you're one or the
that
other.
just, yeah, unless you were John Byrne or Walt Simonson, that really wasn't going to happen. And so I had all these years, a couple of decades of, trying to convince people to let me write. But at the same time, I was learning how to be a better writer. I was learning more about the kinds of stories I really wanted to tell. And so when I finally kind of hit the point, I'd gotten to write a few things, but when the pandemic happened, um, and you saw the original Amelia Shadows, there was nothing to do. Everything was shut down. All the companies were basically like, well, hold off. So I just started doing my own comics, and I kind of tested the waters a few times with a few things that I'd had in the back of my head. And then one of the times, like, okay, I'm going to do like a long one. I'm not going to do just like a 13 episode thing. I'm going to do a long one for social media. This is all for social media. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do a really long book on social media for free, because, I'm a great businessman. Um, if I'm going to do something for free, what's it going to be? And of course, the first thing I think of, well, I'm going to do a magic character. And yeah, she started off as a riff on Zatanna and Scarlet Witch and a few other characters. You know, in the sort of pantheon of magic characters in comics. Very quickly figured out, oh, this is what it's about. It's about this relationship with her father. Um, and it's about her attitude. It's this is not Zatanna. This is somebody with a very, very different kind of personality. And so when I started doing kid stuff, and we were starting to dance around the idea of me doing DC's Misfits of Magic, um, I, as a test, I had so much fun putting that idea together. As a test, I'm like, well, what really is fun is like taking these sort of established adult characters and turning them into kids and seeing what happens. Wouldn't it be fun to do that with one of my characters? And I just immediately went, oh, I could do that with Amelia Shadows. And let's just kind of see. So I did like a 23-page comic in 1 week, which is insane. I wrote it, drew it, colored it, lettered it, everything in 1 week. And I was like, oh, that was great. I want to do more of that. And so I kind of, I came up with the idea of I can do a whole series of these. I can do a whole series of stories. And the funny thing is, very few people have read the adult Amelia Shadows who weren't following me like on Twitter or Twitter during the pandemic. The continuity all matches up. There's nothing in the kids stuff that if I ever get around to publishing the adult Amelia as an adult stories, it's all there. It all holds together because I'm that much fun that I just had to do that. So yeah, they're fun, but it's funny now that like I said, I've done 8 books. Excuse me, I've done 8 books with Amelia as a kid, and it's kind of become its own thing in my head. I come up with Amelia Shadow stories like every time I turn around because it's such a simple and fun concept for me. It's just it's that never-ending source of story ideas of a little kid with no supervision, or a little kid with some supervision that they don't respect at all, and where endless stories, particularly if you throw in, oh yeah, and she does magic. So literally, like I think I had said to Ron Mars actually at one point, he was like, how many Amelia Shadow stories you're going to do? I was like, I don't know, whenever I run out of stories. And Ron's like, okay, so you're never going to stop doing these stories. And it's true.
Well, he was probably like, when you want to kill her off, then I have this other younger, more hipper Amelia.
I mean, I toyed that, and that's kind of, it's sort of the weird thing about doing these Amelia stories is, you can kind of never see the father. So if you've read the adult stories, he's not a good guy. He's a bad guy. And sort of the driving thing of the Amelia as an adult stories are, at a certain point, she basically tries to stop him. And that's all, her entire character is based around this moment of realizing my dad is a supervillain. I have to stop him. Mm-hmm. And so the kid stuff is all like, they're like little hints of like, this is, her dad is maybe not a good guy. And
he got the whole Raven Trigon thing going, right?
Yeah. And no, and that obviously that wasn't a huge influence on this, but yeah, I was like, it's a long-standing trope, but playing with that in the kids space is really fun because she doesn't realize she's just her dad. But it's a slow process over the course of the books of like slowly figuring out that maybe her dad's not a good guy. And so that gets into sort of my one of my big themes, which I think carries both from Amelia Shadows and through the October Girl, which is just, somebody trying to figure out their own path through life. And which to me, I think is like the most interesting theme. And it feels weird to talk about. It always feels weird talking about themes in comics because I come from, superhero world where it's like the theme is good guy fights bad guy. Oh, yeah. And, where most writers go when they want to do something different is, the Sisyphean or no, the Sophie's Choice of, well, I can save the world, but my, girlfriend will end up in a refrigerator. Sorry, Ron.
Sorry, Ron.
That's not how that went down in that comic. But it's like, I can save the world, or this thing I care about will be destroyed, or my girlfriend or wife or whatever will die, and that's and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I always felt like, there was room for a lot more thematic exploration and emotion that you could get out of stories, which is not to say we haven't seen that in comics. And I think more and more comics have started to explore, different, much deeper sort of emotional landscapes. Tom King stuff, I
Agreed.
think, applying that sort of stuff to Batman in a very different way
Yeah.
than Grant Morrison was. Like, so there are people doing that, and that's always kind of what I wanted to do as a writer. Is I wanted to do stories about others, something beyond just the
If and
conflict
how.
of. Yeah, and again, nothing wrong with that. It's fun to do, and boy, is it fun to draw. To just do big Mignola shots of somebody punching somebody, like, come on, like, you're gonna pay me to do that? Great. But yeah, as a creator, like, that's the stuff that really excites me. And it's weird that, like, I really wasn't able to dig into that this deeply until I started doing kids and teen stuff. But it's been great. It's weird though. It's draining. The Amelia Shadow stuff is just fun, but the October Girl stuff, it's really like put myself through therapy for 3 months, where you're just really digging deep into how you felt when you were a teenager, and all these sort of fragments of stuff that, like, used to keep you up at night when you were in high school. Um, so yeah, no, it's a lot like therapy, and Amelia Shadows is a lot like, I don't know, the kind of kid I could have been. Much more fun. Could have gotten into a lot more trouble than I ever did. I was always in the corner reading comic books, trying to stay out of
It's its
trouble.
own special kind of trouble.
Yeah, but at the same time,
It leads to these silly careers making the damn things.
That's true. But but there's still that stuff going on with Amelia Shadows, where it is about her finding her own path, just with no swear words, and no nudity. So
I don't think Mad Cave would have picked it up if
No, not for me.
no. Well, but that's one of the other funny things about doing kid stuff, is that, like, one of the things I always struggled with in mainstream direct market comics was, I was always being told, can you put more blood in this? Can you put, like, put more blood and guts? And that came up many times on the X-Files comic that I did with Joe Harris, where it was always like, can you put some entrails in here? And I'm like, no, that's not what I do. I draw nice comics. Yeah, sometimes there are fights and stuff, and there are sometimes monsters, but I was never. My stuff was always kind of all ages to begin with, so I had to be kind of pushed editorially to make things sexier, make things more violent, make things more graphic. And my instincts are always more towards I want my mom to be able to read this. I want my nieces to be able to read this. So in a weird way, this is kind of what I should have been doing all along. But this stuff didn't exist when I was breaking in. We didn't have kids comics like this. We certainly didn't have YA comics.
Sure.
So
the superheroes are nothing.
Yeah, it was and Vertigo, and I only got to do one. I only got to do one job for Vertigo, and you could do some, like, different stuff at Dark Horse, but it was but the main sort of drive of comics was always superhero comics, and it kind of drives me crazy because I spent a fair amount of time in the 90s and early 2000s trying to convince people to do kids comics. Because I was working part-time in a bookstore, which, if you're going to do comics full-time, work in a bookstore. It's the best job to have. You get health insurance and you're around books all day. And
Heck yes.
I worked at the Borders in Albany on Wolf Road.
it's not there anymore.
It's they shut it down.
No Borders there anymore.
Borders number 35. And then years later, I worked at the Borders in Saratoga Springs. which is also obviously no longer there because Borders no longer exists. But yeah, like I was working at these shops and I was saying this was just the beginning of, Harry Potter and Percy Jackson and all this other stuff. And I was like trying to convince people you need to do comics for that audience. And it never quite landed until other people started doing it, as is often the case in publishing. Other people
Well,
started doing it and they were catching up.
kind of going off that, how was pitching the Mad Cave's paper cuts? Because I know they're very they are very well, the paper cuts imprint is very kid friendly and very focused on those types of books.
Well, I mean, I have to admit I'm in a very privileged position, in that they the head I can't believe is the president. I always forget everybody because I just know them as people. I forget what their
Yes.
actual
What's their
what their actual
Mark.
jobs are. Mark Irwin, at not Mark London, Mark Irwin,
London. No.
who I believe is the president. He had followed. He'd been trying to get the October Girl for years, and it had moved around. We'll tell the story of why it was moving around, but the October Girl project was moving around, and he ended up at Mad Cave and basically went, "Hey Matt, what's the status of the October Girl? Would you be interested in bringing it over here?" So it was like the easiest pitch ever. It's like, yeah, sure. And then there's like, okay, here's your contract. And then I've been very, very lucky in that, the response to the October Girl has been so good, even just internally at the company, that I think this was before the October Girl book one had ever even come out. I had done all these Amelia Shadows books, and I said, "Hey, would you guys be interested in doing these books?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, like everyone up here loves Matt, and the October Girl is really good, sure." So it was just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I even had to write a pitch for Amelia Shadows. I just sent them like the first 4 books and was like, "You guys want to print these?"
Here
But
you go.
so the secret origin of the October Girl, years and years and years ago, I like I said, this is an idea that's been with me a long time. Chris Roberson and his wife at the time, Allison Baker, were starting their own imprint, their own digital comic imprint called Monkey Brain Comics. And bless their hearts, they like really liked what I was doing. And they were like, "Hey, Matt, you want to do a book for us?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to do that. I have this one idea about this girl who," and Chris is like, "No, it's fine. We'll do it." It's like, okay. And so we did
The book pitches
4 issues
itself,
of-
apparently.
Right?
I
job.
don't know. It's wild. It's great. But yeah, so we did for the first four issues. We did 4 issues of it, and I had planned out a whole story arc, which became book 1. So book 1 from Mad Cave Maverick this was the original story we were going to do. But to be, and we did it exclusively through Comixology. It was, some of the very first digital first comics. Yeah. And the readership just wasn't there yet. People really liked it. People were very positive about it. Thank you, Chad. The feedback on it was fantastic. My understanding is it was one of their best-selling titles, but the numbers just weren't there. And at a certain point you just have to be like, this is great, I love doing this, but I can't keep making this for free. And so I kind of had made various attempts to revive it over the years, but it was always with the sort of caveat of, I really kind of can't afford to do this unless someone's paying me to do this.
Obvious.
And then luckily Mark Irwin was a fan of the book, and everyone else at Mad Cave became fans of the book, and they've let me just kind of do whatever I want. just with less typos, because I'm a well, my process is weird because I don't write scripts. I just sit down and I do layouts and I write the dialogue in the word balloon as I go. So I'm lettering the book as I go. And when you're working like that, when you're working that fast, you end up with a lot of typos. It's really embarrassing how many typos are in my books. And my editor catches a lot of them. But what she doesn't know is that I've already done a typo pass. She's catching all the ones that I missed. So there are a lot of typos in my books. But anyway, so the October Girl has just had this really weird sort of trajectory to become what it is. And I always wanted to do it as a book for teenagers. I wanted it to be a YA book, but there weren't YA comics at the time. So I'd done it sort of as just a straight kind of Vertigo style comic. But then once Maverick picked it up and I was starting to experiment with my style for kids, I kind of said, "Hey, can we do this as an actual YA book for teenagers?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, no, that's what it should be." So I was really lucky that they were just like, "Oh yeah, no, that's what we thought it should have been in the first place." So, but yeah, it's an idea that hasn't died, and you don't end up with too many of those ideas in your career as a creative person, where something kind of doesn't quite, not that it didn't work, but it's just the finances of it just didn't work, and you have to stop, and yet you get to come back and do it. And now I get to do, we've done it. They've done the deal for the rest of the books. I get to tell the whole story that I had planned, that I spent 35 years dreaming up, like all the things that I could do with this character. And they're letting me do the whole thing. But yes, at the same time, they're putting out Amelia Shadows, which, hopefully those books do well. I want them to do well so that I could do more. I'd love to print the other 4, but if there are more stories I'd like to tell. But again, it's another weird thing of going from monthly comics to these. You just don't. You kind of feel like you're putting stuff out into a vacuum, because the people who are reading these books should not be online. They're too young to be online. So you're not talking. You put out an issue of the X-Files, and you're getting comments from X-Files fans, usually like, "Wait, there's an X-Files comic?" Yeah, there is. Or complaining about some choice you've made, or
Sure.
how are the lone guns
Dare you
still
interrupt
alive?
continuity.
Yeah, so you have this sort of constant feedback, good or bad. And the kid stuff is different. You feel much more isolated from your audience. So that's something I need to figure out in the next few years, of like, where is that audience? How can I engage with that audience? Right now, most of who I talk to about these books are librarians, which is great. I love librarians. They're the best, and if they like your book, they're incredibly supportive. And so you have to do librarian association conferences and stuff, which are fun, way more fun than Comic-Con. It's so much less stress. A lot of people are giving away free books, which is, as you can tell, I've got books everywhere. Granted, these are my books, but that's another story. So it's weird. So you sort of end up not knowing how the books are going over. And it took me a second to be like, oh yeah, that's right. It's because little kids read it, and little kids are not on Blue Sky talking about their comics, because they should not be on Blue Sky. They're too young.
This should be on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh God, no.
No, sir.
Let's not. No. In fact, I'm all for kids not being online. Not, at least not on social media. It's not good for your brain. It's not good for your, when you're a creator. I think every editor, particularly in the early days of social media, was like, "What are you doing on social media?" Now you're expected to be on social media, but whereas before it was like, "Get off social media. You should be drawing."
Right.
Now it's like, you're spending a lot of time on social media, pushing your stuff. And my problem is I don't have that bone. Whatever that bone is, this is way too insulting, but I always kind of call it the carny bone, the standing on the fairway, shouting, step right up, step right up. I don't have that bone. I have I'm a massive dork and I make comics. That's my bone. So I'm trying to figure out like how I can sell comics with that personality type of like, hi, I'm just a nerd. This is what I do.
I do enjoy your Instagram posts, with the comic book dad, where you kind of give your little nuggets of advice.
Yeah, I always feel weird about doing those because, like, I have been making comics a very long time, but let me tell you, I've made every mistake in comics you can make. I've screwed up in so many ways over the years, and so I always feel a little bit strange doing posts telling people, "Here's what you should do," but at the same time, it's like, "Oh no, wait, I've made every mistake. Let me tell you how not to make this mistake." But yeah, they're funny. Every once in a while, I haven't been doing them in a while, because I would get weird pushback on stuff.
Really?
Yeah, comic book. I whether I'm right or wrong, I think comic book creators really don't respond well to people telling them what to do, particularly when you're breaking in. Well, when you're breaking in and when you've been doing it a long time. We don't respond to other people saying, "Hey, don't do this." The most controversial tweet I've ever done was to say, "Hey, if you're going to do a comic, if you're going to do the layout where there's the panel on the left and then you have two panels stacked on the left and a panel stacked on the right, don't do that unless you were really sure of what you're doing because people won't know which panel to go to next." Not everybody. People who've read comics for a long time can usually figure it out from various clues that we all have learned how to do that. But my mom doesn't know which panel to do next. And people got really upset with me saying not to do that. And it was
You,
like,
sir, this interview is over.
listen, I stand by my thing. My thing is not, and my thing wasn't like you can't use it. My thing is like be careful about using it because it can be confusing. And people like got really kind of annoyed with me, and I got a lot of pushback. The other one was my long held belief that I do kind of think that the legacy characters need to be replaced with the younger generation. Um,
Okay.
I do. I think that every story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
And we've had stories that, even with reboots and relaunches and things, we've been living in the middle of these stories for years
Yep.
and years and years. They need
Superheroes
an
are
end.
definitely in the Act Two.
You need it. You need an act 3, and then you need to, since this IP is also so important and people, generally love these characters, then you bring in the next one. And I have gotten yelled at by much more famous creators than I'll ever be about that. And so, yeah, so I kind of stop. I don't do that often, unless there's something that kind of uh, comes up in the discourse, the so-called discourse, where I just kind of have to get out my soapbox and start talking. But the truth is, we're all idiots. None of us really know what we're doing. Most of us are just hanging on by our fingertips. And every once, what I enjoy being able to do is to occasionally be able to say, "Hey, this is hard. Don't give up. These surviving a career in comics can be really difficult emotionally, financially, in all sorts of ways. You're not alone," kind of stuff. And I feel better about doing that sort of stuff of just like, I was lucky. I broke in a time where you were, in a weird way, you were mentored by people.
Mm-hmm.
I broke in 93, 94. but I when I moved into doing sort of stuff for DC, I got to be friends with Steve Mitchell, and I would hang out and play cards with Len Wein and Marv Wolfman and Mike Barr, Jerry Bingham, a bunch of guys. Like, these were my heroes
Yeah,
reading
totally.
comics. These are the guys. Yeah, these are the guys who wrote the comics. But they would sort of pass on. They would tell you stories, and you would learn stuff about the industry through that. And I think with social media, we're all performing. We're all being sort of this elevated version of ourselves. And so I don't think you have as many real moments of just like, hey, I made that same mistake when I broke in. Or even just saying, hey, be careful with this because, like, I learned not to do that kind of stuff. So I don't think we have quite the same sort of mentor sort of system. You have it in some places like they don't call themselves Periscope anymore. What are they? Steve Lieber's it's an H. No, Helioscope.
Gotcha.
If I got that wrong, I'm really, really sorry, guys. But you get that in these sort of studios, but there aren't that many comic book studios. I share a studio with Rafer Roberts, and we have one of the local art colleges has a comics program, and we take in interns, not to like fetch us coffee because that would be weird, but it's like it's like an extension course. It's a sit with us while I'm drawing way too many comics, and Rafer does his comics, but he also does a lot of production stuff. And so it's like, here, this is what really making comics looks like. Rafer is always the one saying, comics will break your heart, and I'm saying, yeah, comics will break your heart, but also it can be really awesome. You just have to be careful of these things. So
Yeah.
Good creator, bad creator.
exactly, that's exactly what it is.
So
what do you think? Having the experiences that you've had, what do you think is perhaps the most important thing that you've learned, or wish you had known, before you got where you are?
I mean, I've said it before, but I do think it's the biggest mistake I made when I broke into comics, and it's such a weird mistake. Is I agreed to jobs. That weren't really what I wanted to do. And it is incredibly hard, particularly early in your career, to say no to anything. And the problem is, once you do that job, that's not quite right for you. It's not really what you want to be doing. There's a really good chance that you're going to be stuck doing that for,
Right.
the rest of your career, however long your career is. I think my first job at DC was just as an artist, and it was great. I got to do Starman #11 with James Robinson. It was that and Hellboy were my favorite comics. I've gotten to work on both of those comics. And so that was a great job, but it's like, once you're like, okay, you got your foot in the door, and you got to keep your foot in the door, and you're just doing any project that anyone will pitch you. And everything that was pitched me was, well, just come in and draw, do a fill-in issue here or there. And I really should have stuck to my guns and been like, I'm going to wait until I can write and draw. And for people who might be watching or listening who have that same thought, the other thing that I should say is, do your own stuff. I love these characters. Obviously, I mean, I did an entire book that is just a love letter to all my favorite characters, Misfits of Magic. It's just all my favorite characters. I even snuck in Ambush Bug, very tiny little Ambush Bug cameo. And I love those characters, and I have great nostalgia and affection for those characters. But at the same time, like, you really have to be doing your own stuff. if you can write and draw yourself, absolutely do your own stuff. Because that way the only thing you're spending is your time. But you will end up on the other side of it with in a much better place to be able to one go to publish and be like, hey, this is what I do. You want me to do this for you? Or to sell that project to people. And that was a big mistake. I should have been doing my own stuff a lot earlier. It wasn't really until the pandemic where I was like, well, I'm just going to do all the books I always wanted to do, and I'm going to do them online. And I got so much work. It totally changed my career by just posting, just writing, drawing. I taught myself how to color because I couldn't afford a colorist. I taught myself how to letter because I couldn't afford a letterer. But those free stories, I hadn't worked for DC in years, but editors at DC gave me a bunch of fill-in stuff. Um, and it sort of rejuvenated my career. And stuff that I could have done early in my career. I mean, everything that I did that Chad saw, everything I did on Twitter was like the one. I think the very first one I did, well, the second one I did was Johnny Chaos, which was a book that I wanted to do at Caliber Comics back in like the mid
Oh, back in the
90s.
day, yeah.
And I didn't do it because the guy I wanted to draw it was busy doing a little book called Alias with Brian Michael Bendis. I came up with Johnny Chaos for Michael Gaydos to draw because I've known Gaydos for years. He's one of my favorite artists and just a great guy. But every time I was like, hey, do you have time to do a project? He's like, no. And every once in a while he'd be like, hey, can you write this? I'm like, I can't. Sorry, I'm too busy with this other stuff. But yeah, so yeah, that was like, don't. I understand the temptation to like just take the work that's offered, particularly if there's a paycheck, but be careful because you can find yourself sort of pigeonholed, and I did for 20 years. And it for almost 30 years. It wasn't really until I did those pandemic stories that I finally kind of broke free of that. And as terrible as this advice always sounds, and people say it to be mean, I say it with love. Have a day job. Comics will break you if that is your main source of income. You are going to have periods where you're going to just want, even if it's a few $100s a week. And that's a huge mistake that I made that, at various points of my career, I was able to, work at Borders and stuff, but keep a day job for as long as humanly possible. Even if the day job doesn't pay as well as comics. Also, it gets you out of the house. We become weird people locked in our studios, talking to our cats as if they're our children. So yeah, sorry. That was a lot more than one piece of advice, Chad. I apologize.
That's a lot
It
of good
related.
advice.
It was related.
So,
As we wrap up here, you want to give like a final pitch for the two books?
God, you're gonna make me be a carny.
Carney, flex that Carney bone.
Amelia Shadows, little girl, lives in a mansion. She's a magician. Her father is the most powerful dark magician in the world. It is such a fun book for me to do, and I would love for people to read it because I would love to be able to do more. I'm really proud of it. And then The October Girl, it's a young adult. I call it a suburban fantasy. But if you're a fan of, if you're a fan of Sandman, things like that, it's very much coming for that place. If you're a fan of Ray Bradbury, in a lot, I mean, it's called The October Girl because of Ray Bradbury. Though I will just to prove that I'm not a carny, I will tell you one final story. This story lived in my head for so long. And it wasn't until I sat down and started working on the very first issue for Chris and Allison that I realized the main character's name was Autumn. How did I not figure that out? Because that was like 25 years at that point. I never knew what the main character's name was. And I had to sit down and actually say what her name was. They're like, oh, it's Autumn. So I'm an idiot, but my books are good.
Sold.
Yourself short, friend. Well, Matthew Dow Smith, it's been a pleasure chatting with you this evening. You are welcome back anytime to support any of your books. So,
Thank you so much. I
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Um, so that is the end of our show for this evening. Chad, who do we have next?
Next week we have two shows next week. Monday we're talking the Mafia versus the Klan. It's a Source Point book, and then on Thursday, Kat Calamia and Phil Falco will be joining us to talk about their new crossover across their various Oz-inspired titles.
Awesome.
Very cool.
All right. Well, folks, get out there, read some good comics, support local businesses, and just get out there and do some good in the world. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.